Sherry Tunney for the Marine Canvas Training Institute. Today we will demonstrate the making of a dodger. We'll show you how to lay out the patterns to avoid waste and how to cut and sew them together quickly. Our goal, as always, is to demonstrate how to increase your profits through the efficient use of materials and labor, while at the same time turning out top quality marine products. Joining me is Don Wedge, President of the Marine Canvas Training Institute. Hi, Don.
Hi, Sherry.
Don, even though your students may master the skills that make you a leader in the canvas fabrication industry, how important is the material they use?
Well, Sherry, the materials that are used in fabricating our products can be the deciding factor on whether we'll produce a quality product that meets the high standards that we've set for our shop.
I see. So where do you go to get this high quality material?
We use a combination of Sunbrella and Gore-Tex thread. Sunbrella is manufactured by Glen Raven Mills in North Carolina, and part of the reason that we use Sunbrella is the fact that it has a 5-year guarantee on the material and it has a color line that meets all of the demands of our customers to match the colors on their boats.
Okay, now what about Gore-Tex thread?
We use Gore-Tex thread because it's the only thread I know of that's made that can be used on a marine product and guaranteed for the life of that product. So consequently, in addition to the two products that we use Unitex as a supplier for those two products because of their dependability on delivery and their competitive pricing.
So it's safe to say that by utilizing a dependable distributor, such as Unitex, along with quality materials like Sunbrella and Gore-Tex sewing thread, you're pretty much guaranteed a top quality product, one that will withstand the harsh elements.
That's right, Sherry. Let's go back to the shop and go to work.
Okay.
Good afternoon, class, and my friend Lisa over here. What I decided to do today, previously on another tape, we've shown you how to pattern a dodger and how to work the pattern. And because some of you are brand new at this, what we decided to do was put the model of our dodger up here on the table. It's one that I use for teaching all the time so that I could show you the parts and their relationship to each other before we start cutting. So I think you can all see that we have on the top, this is what we call the body of the dodger. Back here on the corner is what we call the wing. This panel up here on the front with the glass in it is the forward panel. And this is called a chafe strip on the top. Now there's some other parts to it that are on the inside that you can't see, but these are the main patterns that we pulled when we were out on the boat working. So now we're going to remove this from the table and we're going to lay the patterns for this up on the material and show you how to cut it out and all the parts that it takes to build a dodger. My friend Lisa is going to move it out of our way.
You got it.
What we have here are all the patterns that it took to build that dodger, and Becky is going to lay it out and show you what they are, what they look like, and how they get laid on the material to cut them out.
Okay, first we've got the forward section, and I'm calling this the forward part of the boat here. So we have port over here and starboard here. This material isn't wide. When they're laid out on the table, this is how they're going to be. You've got the port wing, which goes here, and the starboard wing here. Now these are the pieces that we patterned on the boat, and these are what we're going to cut out in addition to flaps, pockets, and reinforcement pieces. And when you're laying this out, you try to make the best use of your fabric. We've got 46-inch fabric here. What I'm going to do is put the top panel away from me because when I go to pattern the pocket that goes on along the aft, I have to take it and bring it up like this and put it on. So I need to make sure that I have room back here. So I'm going to put this up to the salvage, which is at that end. I'm going to take my wing pieces, but because they're small, like this, the back edge of each wing has to be on a salvage, and that helps prevent stretch. So I've got one wing here and one wing here, and I'm leaving the room here to pull the body part of the dodger back to me. Sandbags?
Just one note, while she's sandbagging these to hold them down, what you'll all notice, I hope you can see it, is that each one of these patterns has two real crazy words on it. They're called sout and pout. And the reason that they're used, we pattern our product out of shrink wrap. And because it's a transparent material, we have to identify which is the outside of the pattern. We also have to know which side of the boat is which. So you'll notice that every one of these patterns has pout, which stands for the port outside of the boat, and sout, which stands for the starboard outside of the boat. This way, every pattern is identifiable. It's never put down upside down and cut backwards, because when you do that, then the boat's got to go the other way and the Dodger's going to be going that way. So this is how we identify our patterns, which is the inside and the outside of the pattern. We always make our patterns in such a way that they're laid on the material face up. Then when we mark our material, we mark the material face up. Why do we do this? Because Sunbrella is the same color on both sides. And we have to know which is the outside of the product and which is the inside of the product. Becky, go ahead.
Okay, we've got some edges on the patterns that get cut with scissors and some that get cut with a hot knife. The snap edges of all patterns get cut with scissors, and any seam that gets sewn that is shown to the customer gets cut with a hot knife. Prevents raveling in the future, and it makes a nice clean cut. Okay, these are the wings here. This edge will get cut with the hot knife, and the snap edges here are with the scissors.
While she's doing that, Dawn is cutting over on the top panel using the hot knife. If you haven't used a hot knife before, you have to learn how to use it. You'll notice that she has developed a particular speed that works well with the hot knife, so that when she's cutting, she's not distorting the material. The reason we use a hot knife is it cuts the material and seals the edge at the same time. You'll also notice that many of these panels are bias cut panels, and a bias cut panel will stretch. So we try to cut it with as little distortion as we can get away with, so that it stays the same size that we started out. So part of the reason for using a hot knife is it stabilizes that edge and makes a nice edge for the customer to look at when he's looking at the inside of the Dodger. Many times when we're cutting a job out, if we happen to be working alone, today I got lazy and I'm not doing anything. I got the girls doing it all. So a lot of times if we're working alone, when we pick up the hot knife to cut the job out, we just cut the whole thing with the hot knife, because it doesn't take any longer to cut it out with a hot knife than it does with shears. I'll make one other statement about cutting acrylics, okay? Many of you have nice sharp shears like we have, and when you're cutting with your shears, if you're cutting acrylics and you're cutting on a bias cut, you cut, you do not slice, because that has a tendency to ravel the edge of the material and to stretch it out of shape. I got these girls so busy they can't even talk, so I'll keep talking. You'll notice that Dawn has picked the pattern up and written sout on the starboard side and pout on the port side. Why did she do that? Again, the material's the same color on both sides, so that when we go to sew this later, we'll know which is the outside of the material so that we can sew it together in a proper sequence. So every pattern is marked and every piece of material is marked. The thing that she's using to mark with is soapstone. It's something that welders use to mark steel when they're working with steel. We've found that soapstone can be sharpened and give you a nice fine line. And the other thing is, it does not leave a permanent mark on the material as some of the other things do, like crayons and so on. So soapstone works so well that I usually say spit on it and wipe it off, and they don't like to hear that, so get yourself a wet sponge, wipe it off. That sounds a lot classier than the way I do it, but it still works.
Before you move all your pieces, make sure that you have all your marks on your patterns, such as your snap lines, your center notches cut, indicating the center of that pattern, In this particular one, we have wing marks here, which indicate this is where the wing stops sewing. You have a flap section in here, and the wing picks up again. These have to be here, so that gives you some sort of reference once you get started sewing to go with. So that's what I'll mark here is the wing here, and notch the center.
Why don't you tell them why you're notching it instead of marking it back? Or you want me to tell them?
Go ahead.
Here's why we notch our center marks. All of you that have been in the boat business a little while know what I'm talking about, but some of you don't. So I'm going to tell you right now, there's only one thing on a boat that's right, and that's the center line. So everything that we design, build, and manufacture is done to the center line of the boat. Consequently, when we make a product, if we do the center line on the piece, then it gives us a reference point to work to from one end of that boat to the other. If you'll design all your products to work from the center line of the boat, you won't get in trouble. If you try to do it the other way around, you're going to create a real big problem. So we notch our center line marks on every piece if it applies. Reason being, we may have to go back and find out where the center line was in order to reconstruct some part that we've got a little problem with. And we do have problems some days. Go ahead, Becky. Why don't you run the center line right on across this scrap? Show them how we do that. The reason she's running the center line across this balance that's left over here is this is where the pocket is going to be cut from that supports the back frame on the Dodger. In order to keep everything symmetrical, she's extended the center line onto the material. She's going to put 2 marks 6 inches back, right?
Right.
Out in a curved area. Then she's going to pull the top panel up onto the scrap material and lay it there using the top panel as the pattern to cut the shape of the pocket for the aft frame.
And what I've done was bring the notch up to the center line that I extended and the edges of the Dodger here back to the 6-inch marks that I made. Now when I make a pocket on a Dodger, I generally go 2 or 3 inches to the outside edge of the wing marks here. That way when the Dodger is on the frame, you don't see framework sticking out in between here. You see material all the way around. So just for reference myself, I'm just going to come over here and put the marks on my material so I know where I'm going to do my cutting from. This edge can be cut with scissors because this will be a hidden edge once it's all sewn, top sewn and put onto the frame. And all you need to do is trim around the edge of the Dodger top, which gives you your shape. Cut in your notch. When you put this back, you've got the shape already of the material that you're going to sew down. This here indicates, these marks indicate where the pocket is going to be hemmed. I'm going to be taking a 1/2-inch seam allowance when I do it, so I'm just going to eyeball that difference here. And I always identify all of my parts. That way if you have someone else sewing for you or you sit down and sew yourself and get interrupted, next time you go down to sit down and sew, you've got something to tell you where you're at or what piece you have, and you don't have to fumble through all your pieces. We also need a pocket for the forward part of this panel. This is a fitted pocket also on one edge because this is so small.
Right here, Beck.
I can get there. Get a flap out too.
Well, if you want your flap, go ahead.
Here again, you can pull it up. I'm going to use the rest of this. There's not much material left here. The pockets, you never want to make too long. You want to stop prior to getting into the bend of the framework. In this case, we have a small sample here, so I'm only going to go approximately 5 inches each side of center. And this again is the same type of a cut where you use the scissors because it will be a hidden seam once it's on.
What you will notice that every pocket that we cut is cut to the shape of the top or the panel that sits on the frame. Why do we do that? Because we believe that if you put a pocket on a product, it has to fit the shape of the frame. Otherwise, there's no point in doing it. Many people put a straight pocket, and what will happen is that it will throw wrinkles into the product. So we put a shaped pocket on every frame, on every product that we do. This way we don't have to worry about those little crinkles like you get around your eyes when you get older like me.
What I didn't explain while I was doing this here is the distance here is 6 inches also. So if you were wondering how I knew where to cut, the measurement from the edge of your material here into it is 6 inches. This is the flap, or the pocket that goes there. All right, we also need to have off of this piece a flap along the aft end. There again, I generally tend to bring it a couple inches outside of the wing marked areas so that it gives it a nice finished look. Now the flap for this area is that distance, that whatever that measurement is, by 5 inches. And you take the 5 inches and fold it in half. Once you take your 2.5 or your half-inch seam allowance, you wind up with a 2-inch finished flap. Okay, 2 inches beyond each mark here. Winds up being 21, so I need a piece that's going to be 21 inches long by 5 inches.
Now, why don't we just take it when we cut the front panel, Vicki?
This is the forward panel of the Dodger. If you remember the model that we had here, the whole front area was clear except for a 2-inch border at the top and at the bottom. And the reason for the 2-inch border is that at the snap edge you have 2 inches so that you have room for the snap. And then across the top, after you take your half-inch seam allowance here, you'll wind up with an inch or inch and a half of border before you get into the clear material.
Did everybody catch what she just did? The pattern was laying here, she started talking, and then she flipped it end for end. Why did she do it? Because she couldn't read sout and pout. Real important, because you always want your pattern face up when you're cutting. When you're doing Sombrella, you can get away with murder because it is the same color on both sides. But if you were making this out of a vinyl with a denim back or a Weblon with a blue back or something like that, if you cut it with the pattern upside down, you just got an upside down Dodger, and we don't want that. So back to why we got sout and pout. You'll also, all of you, notice that in using the hot knife, we have a foot on it. Now I know most of you have a hot knife, many of you don't have a foot for it. There happens to be about 3 different feet made for these hot knives. 2 of them make great weights to go fishing with, and 1 of them is really good. This happens to be one of the better ones, and the reason we use it is it keeps the hot knife blade up off of the table so that we don't put those little burn marks down the table like you guys have on yours. Or as some people do, they have a piece of masonite or a piece of formica that they put on the table just to do their hot knife cutting. With this foot, it eliminates all of that.
Okay, here again we're back to marking our panel. Don't forget to notch your center. You'll need this when you sew it to your top panel. Also down here, you'll notice that we have a line drawn on our pattern. What this line is when we pulled our patterns, this is where the frame intersects. We have a wing that's going to attach here, and all this is a reference place. So when we start sewing, we know that if we went from here to here and to the same place over here, that we wind up getting our pattern right. Okay, the other pieces we still have to cut, or on this piece still before we move on, we need to turn it over because on the back side we're going to indicate where we want all of our glass to be sewn. Now, if you remember before, I said we had 2-inch border at the bottom at the snap line, which is here, and we have a 2-inch border up here because you have your 1/2-inch seam allowance, and then you need some area of fabric before you get into the glass. So I'm going to go around the perimeter of this and put 2-inch hash marks and then connect those with a straight edge. You can, when you get down into this area here, you can get fancy, you can make them rounded, you can do any kind of a shape if the customer has something they want special done there, but generally it's just a nice rounded edge. It's more pleasing to the eye than coming to a point.
Plus, it's easier for the seamstress to sew. The person that's doing the designing, the patterning, and the cutting has to keep in mind all of the other people behind them, because you can create a monstrosity for somebody to put things together. So everybody has to be working together and thinking together. That's part of what this course is about, is to get everybody to work together, because that's how you make money.
Now, I'm not going all the way to the end because that's going to wind up being erased anyways later. I'll show you what I'll do when I get all the way around this. Okay, it doesn't matter what size you have down here. I just happen to pick up a roll of binding that has a round radius to it, and all I'm going to do is bring it back until the chalk line here and the chalk line here meet this round, and I'm just going to trace it in. So our glass, when it's in, will follow this shape here, and this will be erased. Okay. That's the glass markings on the forward panel. We need clear vinyl that needs to go in here, but we also got to remember that we can't forget the flap that has to go on too.
Should we cut the flap before we forget it? Or should we forget it? Let's cut it.
Let's cut it. Okay. Okay, if you remember before, I said it needed to be 21 inches by 5. I'll go from the salvage edge here. See if I can do this.
Here, let's do it so we can show these people how carpenters do it, Becky.
All right.
Because this is the way you're supposed to do things so that you make money. That's the only reason we were put here, was to make money.
Now this is longer than I need, but I'm going to go back.
Everybody knows how she just did that. Carpenter's been doing that for the last 1,000 years. And many of the things that we do in this business were tricks that I was taught when I was a little boy, because my granddad and my father were carpenters. And this is how you scribe a board. So we just use the corner of our table. This is also why our tables, we try to have them cut nice and square and smooth so that we can do that and not get slivers on our little fingers.
Okay, if we go back to the forward panel, we've got that cut. What I'm going to do is take clear vinyl now and lay it over it so that we can get our clear vinyl cut down to a easier shape to work with once we get to the sewing machine. Now what I'm doing is bringing the clear vinyl so that it comes past all of these cut edges here. The reason being because on the snap edge, which is here, this clear vinyl behind the acrylic acts as your snap reinforcement. Same way with up here, it gives it a little bit more body once it's on the frame. All I'm going to do, you can see your chalk lines through the clear vinyl. I'm just going to trim the clear vinyl so that it's something a little bit easier to work with at the sewing machine.
And in a minute she said she was going to do that to support the snaps. I just remembered something we both forgot to cut. But we haven't got away from the cutting table. And this is one of the things that we would double check before we walk away from the cutting table. But on the back pull edges of the wings, it requires a facing 2.5 inches wide with some vinyl buried in it. Why? Because that is the edge of the wing that holds the whole Dodger up. So we have to have a facing to cover up the vinyl that we're going to bury in it. So she has to
The
cut
roll.
2 pieces of facing 2.5 inches wide by the length of the pulled edge of the wing, which is what she's working on right here. And remember, this is the selvage that we're running down the pull edge of the wing. Why are we doing that? Because selvages do not stretch. And if that part of the Dodger can't stretch, it'll stay nice and tight. If it's cut on a bias cut, it conceivably could stretch and the whole Dodger could fall down.
And what I did was, this is the wing here, this is the edge that will be reinforced. All I did was take a measurement. That edge will be, in this case, 24 inches by 2.5 inches wide. And I'll need 2 of those because you're going to need one for the port and one for the starboard.
And I suppose you want to do this on the edge of the table, right, Becky?
No, I'll show this one with the ruler.
Oh, okay, whatever turns you on.
We need a variety.
Okay. That's what happens when your daughter knows more than you do. But we have fun, right, Beck?
Right. Okay. This was 21 before. I'm just going to cut this a little bit longer.
Y'all notice she's cutting, she's not slicing. She wants to maintain the integrity of the piece that she's cutting.
The way these look when they're on the pattern, if you want to see that, this is the, let me get this on the table so you can see it easier.
Let me move this.
This is the outside of our starboard wing. This being the salvage edge that has to be reinforced when it's laid up and sewn. This will be down first, and this will be on top of it. And both wings are done the same way.
This gives you a reinforced edge with a nice facing on the inside for the customer to look at. We have one more thing to cut for this. If you remember right, on the other Dodger, we had a chafe patch. We have some gray vinyl over there on the table, Dawn, if you'd hand us that. The quick and dirty way to cut this chafing patch is if you take the aft pocket for the frame and lay it on there and cut the chafe patch a little larger than that, you're in good shape for putting it on the top of the Dodger. Now in this particular case, we're using vinyl. Part of the reason we're using vinyl is it shows up better on the videotapes, but also many people do use it on their boat. You can use vinyl if you want to get real exotic. You can use leather. And if you're charging top dollar for your product, we always suggest leather to the customer because it looks real exotic. You always cut this chafe patch about 1 inch wider front to back than the pocket, so that when you sew the chafe patch down first, then when you sew the pocket down, you're sewing through the chafe patch.
Make sure that you notch your chafe patch back here at the back, because when you go to lay all these down to be sewn, you're going to be lining up this piece of material with the pocket, with the chafe patch, with the flat. And if they're all notched in the center, you have one common starting point.
Now we have cut out this complete Dodger, but what we're going to do is take about 1 minute here and lay it up on the table so that you can see all of the parts and the relationship of each part to each other as it's laying here on the table in a flat shape. Hopefully the table's big enough.
Do you want the pieces on? Do you want the pattern pieces on?
One more little statement. On the forward panel, you'll see where the girls have put the dots for the snaps, which were taken from the boat onto the pattern, put from the pattern onto the material. The one thing we do not do is we do put the dots on for the snaps as a reference, but we do not commit to the snaps until we install it on the boat. Why? Because when you get it on the boat, a 1/16 of an inch can make the difference between whether you've got a wrinkle or a skin-tight Dodger. And that's what we shoot for, is a Dodger that will bounce the raindrops right back up in the sky. Hope everybody can see this. Let's throw that out of the way so they can all see these parts, Beck. And I know we have got every part of this Dodger cut out, and it has not taken all that long to do it. So Lisa, in class, I hope that you got what you needed out of this as far as cutting out a Dodger. It did not take that long, and you have a Dodger that you know is going to fit the boat. Thank you.
We'd like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors, the people from Glen Raven Mills Incorporated, who manufacture Sunbrella, Unitex Incorporated, a nationwide distributor, and W.L. Gore & Associates, using creative technologies worldwide in the making of Gore-Tex sewing thread. Join us again when we show you how to increase your profits and save time and effort with the Marine Canvas Training Institute programs.
Sherry, you know you've done a fantastic job, but you know what?
What?
I'm sick of working. Let's go fishing.
Okay, Don, let's fish.